got the skepticism breaking it down. He's got the answers that are waiting to be found. We mix it all up in a quantum machine, the craziest duo that you've ever seen. Oh, it's the skeptic and the disciple. Yeah, we keep it moving, yeah, we keep it vital. Faith and logic and funny business. Welcome to the show.
Welcome back to The Skeptic and the Disciple. I'm Mike Litman, the quantum disciple, and this is my partner in crime, Megan, our skeptic. Today, we're actually going to talk about a topic that Megan's been asking for a while. In fact, actually, maybe since we started this ministry, and that's what about the dinosaurs?
Yay, finally.
So, so there's several things connected here. We have to talk about young Earth versus old Earth, and we have to talk about the flood, and then we have to talk about how do all those things play into what's the scoop with the dinosaurs. Now, first of all, we can go back and say, if you go and look at any of we have a paper up. I don't remember which course number it is, but on evolution, as well as old Earth versus new Earth, as well as Noah's flood. So I think those three link together pretty well as part of this conversation. Now I'll give you the punchline was that whether you think the Earth is 6,500 years old or you think the Earth is billions of years old, it doesn't actually matter.
Well, let's take it back to my original question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So my original question is, if man came before dinosaurs as Adam and Eve, but dinosaurs came before man, how does that work? So that is my original question.
Okay, well, so that sounds like you're making an assumption that dinosaurs came before man. Well, actually, it's not an assumption. If you go back to Genesis 1, let me actually bring it up here. Genesis 1 is a pretty interesting thing as we kind of watch how things unfolded by day by day.
I feel like where I got that from is, as you learn about the dinosaurs in school, you're always learning that dinosaurs predated man.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I think one thing you can sort of kind of maybe throw out the door, and I don't want to go too far down the pipeline of evolution today, so we can stay squarely on your dinosaurs. But if you read our evolution paper, I think you will find pretty quickly that there is actually very, very, very little evidence that supports evolution. I would say that the reason evolution is being taught in schools today has more to do with scientists insisting there's not a God and having to create a leap from what we see in the, let's say, the fossil record and see in our species today, and what we think they looked like before, starting off with, single cell organisms and stuff like that. That whole process started way, way, way before we were able to look at the details of a cell and realize that this thing is pretty complicated. But in any case, there really isn't any evidence that supports what's called macro evolution. Macro evolution being that we started with single cell organisms and grew into something else. Now, microevolution, does exist and actually would kind of help explain Noah's Ark from the perspective of, one of the things that is discussed in that story is that, the animals marched on there two at a time, yada, yada, yada. Well, it wasn't every single animal that would have ever existed. It was the type of animal, so there's like a horse type, there's probably multiple bird types, so you start with a core at when you look at the animal kingdom, there's things that are at the top of these hierarchies. And so we had two of a kind as a representative from these types, these kinds. And then from there, microevolution broke them into these different branches, different color stripes, things like that. That would be, a very cursory level of that. Maybe I should even do a paper on micro versus macro evolution in the Bible or something. something that might be kind of interesting, just to
Absolutely.
really dive into the idea of microevolution for that.
So
Um,
what you're saying is, like, they could have had a gorilla on there, and somehow with your evolution, chimpanzees and other forms were created?
I would say yes, but I'm not sure gorilla would have led to chimpanzee. I think they are of different kinds, but I'm not positive. Now we're starting to get in, outside over my skis. But big picture, I don't think it's well believed that literally every single variation of every single core animal type was on the ark, because now we're getting into the whole argument. Well, how big, the ark was described as being a certain size, which was really big, but still smaller than, like, modern cruise ships and stuff by a lot. I think the ark was something like was it like 300 feet long? I might be making a whole bunch of stuff up. I don't even want to throw numbers out there. It's measured in cubits. But the ark was really big, but not like astronomically big. We see ships bigger than the ark today. So now we have to operate off of how much stuff could have fit into the ark. Now the ark's design is pretty cool, where we have like I think we've had the Army Corps of Engineers kind of look at how it was described to be built and decided, hey, that would be a really good design for surviving a violent, flood scenario, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But anyway, you cut it, the ark probably wasn't big enough to hold every single species that's ever existed. So that's how we need to look at, does it hold enough for maybe microevolution to take it to what we see today? And we've seen animals go extinct, and we've seen, new animals come into existence, presumably from something like microevolution.
Like
Um,
what? What animals came into existence?
oh, well, I mean, like you think about, you look at
Oh, I
lizards.
just caught you off guard, didn't I?
Well, no, you look at lizards. I mean, there's 4 zillion kinds of lizards, and they all basically look the same. You could probably, go to a pet store and look at, 10 different breeds of lizards or whatever, at the pet store, yet they all basically look the same. So, not being a biologist, I'll take the leap that I think they're all of the same kind. So, chances are what was on the ark was two of lizard kind. And then from that, we got some of these smaller lizards, some of these larger lizards, venomous lizards, less venomous lizards, things like that. Those grew out of that base kind. Now, I don't know what the base lizard kind was. Presumably God picked the type of lizards that would be the most compatible starting point for microevolution. So and keep in mind, one thing that we want to be careful of here is, we're kind of talking about plausible things that could have happened. None of us were back then, so we don't know. We're just trying to decide, can we scientifically explain how Noah's Ark could be true without making, really any stretches. We don't want to invent something new. So we only want to talk about things that we've seen, and we've seen microevolution in animals. I give a whole bunch of examples of it in that paper where, modern scientists have observed it. So this is something that we know goes on. So to sit there and say, oh, well, microevolution doesn't exist, that's going to fail real quick. But it's the macroevolution that we don't have any real evidence for.
So then would, like, macro would be where they say that humans evolved from monkeys type stuff?
Correct. Yeah. And then, the issue is there's a missing link that is somewhere in the middle of that. And I talk about this obviously in a lot more detail in the paper, but effectively scientists got it to one place. We got like the monkeys, the Neanderthals, blah, 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 whatever, they have that chart, right? And then we have humans, and presumably there's a missing link between the thing that came before humans and humans. Whether it's one link or 20 links, there's something that the scientists do not have to make that connection. But instead, they've just decided that connection must exist in many cases because the Noah story or the Bible can't be true. So rather than operating off of a evidence-based thing and let's look at all of the material around us, I mean, first of all, you got to go back and look at the the amount of stuff that supports the Bible's validity.
Well, yeah,
At
nothing
least,
can technically come before humans if Adam and Eve were the first thing created.
well, no, okay, so let's roll back to that. So I brought up Genesis 1 here, and I'm not going to read it. I'm just going to do the highlight reel of day 1, day 2, day 3. So day 1, God created the heavens and the earth. So we have he said, "Let there be light." He separates light from darkness, day and night. Now, what's interesting here is later on, he actually talks about the sun and the moon. So when he said "let there be light," this is kind of compatible with the paper on like what will heaven and hell be like. I think they're actually two separate papers, but what is hell? What happens when somebody has rejected God and they die? Well, what happens is it's separation from God, and part of that separation is you no longer have the light of God. So presumably this is talking about some sort of source of light that, I don't know, is this God's flashlight or something? I guess I don't know. I mean, I'd be making it up, but this seems to be a source of light that's not the sun.
Okay.
Day 2, sky and atmosphere. God creates a vault. This is kind of an interesting thing, and this relates to Noah's flood. So he creates this thing, so the vault or firmament, some people have heard, to separate the water under the vault from the water above it. So almost like there's water trapped in the sky is kind of how I imagine it. Um, uh, let's see. Day 3, land and plants. God gathers the water to let dry ground appear, so earth and seas. So we already have a bunch of water that was designed below the firmament, and now God has, it says, gathered it. So presumably he made some deeper pits like the oceans where the water settles into those areas. That, I'm guessing that's what gathering it means. Then God creates vegetation, so seed-bearing plants and trees. So presumably he snapped his fingers and now we have, plants and trees and they're seed-bearing, and presumably they're basking in his own light, because we haven't even talked about the sun yet. But we're still under this, guys, that, hey, this, we're talking about God here. He can kind of do whatever he wants. He's the creator. Again, this is something that we're saying this is a plausible thing. If you
Well,
believe in the Bible, you believe in Christianity and all these things, this is something we would believe God can do.
okay, so like
All right.
let's just put it into normal, something relatable terms. It's almost like The Sims. When you're in build mode, nothing's actively going on. It's just kind of sitting there while you're in build mode until you go live, until you hit
Yeah,
the play
but
button.
I do wonder. So like if you're, I mean, I don't, I played The Sims, probably the very first version of it, but in my mind I'm kind of thinking like Farmville as being something similar, where you build you plant your crops or something like
Right,
that, and then there's usually kind of a timer while those crops grow.
right.
I mean, it's certainly possible that that's kind of how God made this happen, where, he created all the seeds and he planted them and then waited for the seeds to grow into plants and the acorns to grow into trees and all that stuff. Um, that's not the way I read it. And I
I
think
guess
that's not,
the way in The Sims, it's like 2 separate modes. So, like, if you don't hit the play button, you're literally just in pause. You're in a
mhm,
pause while you're building,
yep.
and then once you hit play, then life starts and everything starts going on. So I guess that's kinda how I picture it. He's in a build mode where nothing can die, nothing can create, nothing can move, time doesn't pass, it's just building,
Yeah, and
and then you push play.
somewhere we get into, is this 7 literal days, or are these days going across huge periods of time? Now, my personal belief, and maybe this is something else, I think I have it on my list for papers. But let's say my spidey senses. So my personal belief, based on my current study, and that belief could change once I really dive into the subject, is that we are talking about 7 literal days here, not millions of years that, because there's a place in the Bible where, it basically says time is different for God. 1,000 years is like a day to God, or something along those lines. Um, so uh, I would say this happened in 7 literal days, which means there isn't enough time to wait for plants and trees to grow. And then the specific wording says God
Now,
creates vegetation, seed bearing plants and trees. So I imagine this being he snapped his fingers and we have forests, we have plants already bloomed. The earth is now covered in vegetation. That's how
right.
I imagine this went down.
Now, my
And it
question,
specifically mentioned that it's seed bearing so that those plants can reproduce on their own. Then go ahead. Sorry.
no, that's okay. So now my question is, in the Bible, is time always discussed as 24-hour period for a day? Like it's always been that.
That's actually interesting, and that's something that gets into like Daniel's prophecies, which again, I'll try not to get too far off the thing, but in the book of Daniel, where he's prophesying when the Messiah will be on the scene. And we kind of talked about that in the last podcast. I'm pretty sure when we were talking about the timing of all that. So during that time, Daniel had an encounter with an angel. I believe it was actually mentioned as Gabriel, but it was at least an angel of the Lord, who gave him a prediction of when the Messiah would be on, and he gave him like concrete things to operate off of. But what he gave him was not the exact. He didn't say, "Oh, it's going to be in 25 years or 320 days." He gave it to him in like let me actually look it up here real quick. It was really um kind of an interesting thing, which then answers your question.
Sorry, now I'm getting us off topic, but your talking leads to more questions, hence the skeptic in me.
No, and this is good, but this will give you that example of how things are in the Bible. I think this will pretty cleanly answer your question. I mean, the short answer to your question, while this is searching it, is that it's not always given in years. So let's see. So this is Daniel 9:24 through 27. Let's see. So Gabriel didn't give just one number. He broke the timeline into 3 distinct blocks. And this is where it becomes interesting. So he says 7 sevens. So this was the time allocated to the actual rebuilding of Jerusalem. So the period of time when that happens, 7 sevens, when you go back to what that meant back then, comes out to like 49 years. But we're having to do this translation between how what the people of that time period would have understood. Similarly, we have 62 sevens, was his second prediction. This is the period of silence that we're waiting between, when Jerusalem is rebuilt and when the Messiah will be on the scene. So that comes out to like 434 years when we do the translation of that. And at that point, let's see, Gabriel says that after these 2 blocks, there'll be 9 sevens, that anointed one, the ruler, will come. So that would be what Christians would believe is Jesus, the Messiah. So back in the Old Testament, they gave time periods in, as modern day people, we would say weird ways, but it would have felt normal to them back then. So I think that comes out to 583 years or something, is my recollection. I don't have it sitting right in front of me, but that would kind of be the deal with it. But time is weird, when we think about the Bible. So the question about, is 7 days really 7 days as humans understand it, or is it longer? It's a fair question. We really don't know. We have to speculate. And I think that typically Bible scholars land on the side of 7 physical days. But I don't want to necessarily own that until I look into it specifically myself. In fact, let me make sure it's on my list of papers so I don't forget it.
You're welcome. More material.
No, I mean, it's perfect. It's a really good thing. An actual 7 days. But yeah, so measuring time is a little bit wonky. we can say, but I think I'm going to operate in this discussion off of 7 literal days. But I'm not sure it necessarily matters because it still gives us the correct order that things were made.
Okay.
So we had the land and plants on day 3. On day 4, we had the sun, the moon, and the stars. So God creates lights in the vault of the sky to serve as signs for seasons, days, and years. And he created a greater light and a lesser light, so the sun and the moon. But that first line is actually very interesting. Lights in the vault of the sky. So that's up where presumably we've separated the water from the water below the firmament and the water above the firmament, but we see lights in the vault of the sky. So when you
So the
think of
vault would be
lights,
space.
that's how I interpret it. So when we say sky, we look up and we think about lights in the sky, and we're still in the although this is kind of interesting, it talks about the sun as the greater light and the moon as lesser light. The moon is not without light, it's just lesser light. So we have another source of lights described here as the lights in the vault of the sky to serve as signs for the seasons, the days, and the years. And I'm sure they used, back then it would have been Hebrew. This was written by Moses, so he would have been writing this in Hebrew, the equivalent for the time. This is a American or a English speaking translation that has converted it to the idea of seasons, days, and years. But the point is this sounds like stars. But this then becomes an interesting discussion because stars are really, really, really far away. So as far away as stars are, especially for people who think the Earth is only 6,500 years old, the light from stars, the light from the very closest star would not have arrived here yet. Now, even if we operate off the Earth being millions or even billions of years old, we see lights in the sky. We see the light from stars that wouldn't be here yet either. So that makes it very interesting that we're seeing lights in the sky that have no business being there.
Right.
In either case, because we think light travels really, really, really fast, but it does. But space is, as far as we understand it, humongous, right? We've sent things physically out into space, so at the very least, we know it's really big because we've had things get out of the local system. I think one of our Voyager probes has now exited our solar system and is now out in, I guess, what we would call outer space. So we at least know it's that big because we've thrown something that far. But in any case, the fact that we look up at the stars at night and see so many dots of light, frankly, is impossible, regardless of whether you think the Earth is young or old. We see too much light. So what does that tell us? Well, the light is there. We see it. So presumably God created those lights already in transit from those stars. If those lights are even emitted from those stars, it's entirely possible that what we're seeing up in the sky is light, visible light that God put there, and the lights coming from those stars really far away is still in transit and hasn't even gotten anywhere close to that yet. I mean, I'd be guessing, did he accelerate the speed of the light? Did he create it with the light already here? And it's still streaming in from the things that are zillions of years, like zillions of light years away. Light year is the amount of time it takes light to travel how far light travels in 1 year. And it would take millions of years for many of these stars to get to us. Even the closest star is I want to say it's Alpha Centauri. I want to say it's several 100,000 years away. I might be far away, but it's less than 1 million, but it's still it's far. Yeah. So in any case, that's the sun, moon, and stars thing. And that also kind of leads into a creation concept where, like when God created Adam, we presumably think Adam was, like a full-grown man, like a 30-year-old or a 25-year-old or something like that. We don't really get the impression that Adam was a newborn and just kind of
Right.
they told a newborn to name all these animals and they're in the Garden of Eden and stuff. But in any
Well, I
case, so
feel
day
like a
4.
newborn's not going to be able to reach the apple.
Well, that's true. Although Eve is actually the one who handed the apple to Adam, I believe. So
Right, but
Eve
why would Adam
presumably
be a
would have also been a
newborn?
newborn. Right, right, right.
Yeah.
Plus, do we really imagine God's removing ribs from a newborn baby? You know, if
Yeah,
Adam
that's a
was a
little
newborn and God took the rib from Adam to make woman, to make Eve, um,
that's a
but
bit of a
yeah,
stretch.
in any case, day 4 talks about sun, moon, and stars. So that could be a whole conversation on just that stuff. In fact, here, I wanna write a paper on the stars.
I'm just
What
giving you a whole list of work.
on the stars. All right. So that's day 4. Day 5, sea creatures and birds. Okay. So we have teeming life in the water, fish, possibly sea monsters and whales. There's a really interesting book. I'm going to butcher the name of it, but it's called oh man, I'm going to really butcher it. Something like there was monsters back in this time period. It's a book kind of about Noah's flood, and it talks about what was the world like before Noah's flood. And while this is coming up, the kind of the mentality there is, what's the rationale for Noah's flood? Before we even talk about whether it happened, let's talk about the rationale that the Bible gives us for why it happened. So if we pause for a second and just assume there was some sort of massive flood, whether it was something that was worldwide or something that was more local, there's plenty of evidence for it happening in many places around the world, since there is stories about a massive flood all over the planet when we didn't have airplanes or even boats that traveled that far back then. So these people didn't talk to each other, I suppose, and yes, aliens are involved or something. But, regardless, one way or another, these guys all wrote about a flood thing. Let's see. That's not it. Book of Giants. No, that's not it. But in any case, the time before the flood, the idea was we were in an extremely sinful world. Things had really gone to crap. And, effectively, Jesus picked, Jesus, God, same thing from a Christian perspective, but God picked a effectively 6 people, right? He picked Noah and his wife, and then his 3 sons and their wives. That's 8 people, right? So 6 becomes 8 because I needed to work on my math a little bit there, I guess. So he picked 8 people.
PhD, full effect.
Yeah, that's right. Well, yeah, but that was my PhD is from many years ago. I've lost brain cells. I think I still do all right, but in any case, the earth had gone to crap. So he picked 8 people to repopulate the earth, told Noah, build this giant boat, put a bunch of animals on this boat, and you and these animals are going to ride out this flood and then repopulate the earth. That's the gist of the flood story. And the why. Why did God need to do this? Because he needed to wipe out all the rest of the life on earth.
So pretty much we should
Why?
be
Because it had
concerned
gotten
right
too
now
sinful.
about a flood.
Say this again. I'm sorry.
I said we should be concerned right now about a flood happening in today's earth.
That has crossed my mind recently, is that, I imagine as much as we've fallen in today's world, I mean, it feels like we're kind of getting tired of the crap we see on TV and every single week. I think nothing surprises us anymore, right?
Nope.
We're every single day we see the next horrible thing on TV or read about it in the news or whatever, and it's like we've been desensitized to things that would have been horrible before.
Oh,
And
absolutely. I could see an alien walking, like a green alien walking down the street, and I would not be surprised.
yeah. Like there's things that just wouldn't shock us anymore. And I think you're right. I think that's actually a pretty insightful point you just made there, Megan.
Oh, thank you.
That was a very smart comment.
Finally.
No, you're very smart. You just act ditzy.
Yeah, it's all an act, I promise.
No, you are naturally ditzy, but it sits in front of real intelligence.
Absolutely.
But in any case, I think you're right. I kind of feel like we're almost like due for another quote flood. And the reality is God said after the flood that he'll never do that again. He said he'll never destroy, I don't remember his exact words, but something along the lines of he'll never flood the earth again or never kill everything off again, something along those lines. So at the very least, we know we're not getting a flood, but we're also told through prophecy that effectively the Messiah is coming back. So the Christians would believe Jesus is coming back for his people. We have a recent paper on the rapture. So the rapture is a really interesting topic about, when does Jesus take his believers? So if you're a believer in Christ, you would be what we would call, a Christian would call you saved. We believe that we are going to, we're God's chosen ones, and some Christian denominations believe in something called the rapture. In the Bible, there's a part where it says the believers were caught up. And that's where the word rapture comes from. It's the original language. I think that is a Greek. Let's see, where would it be? It would be, I think it's in Revelation, which would be, did he write it in Greek or Hebrew? I don't know. I don't know if I would guess Revelation's original language is, let's go with 70% sure Greek. Let's find out.
Again, PhD, full effect.
Well, I don't have a working knowledge of everything, but I have a pretty good way of finding stuff. It was written in Koine Greek.
Oh, okay, you were right.
Well, but hold on here. I'm gonna. Okay, since you're questioning the intelligence, I wrote an app to teach myself Koine Greek, which is biblical Greek. So it's now I don't speak fluent Koine Greek, but I can pick out like major names and cities and stuff like that, and read some of the verses, like Jerusalem. No, I think it's Jerusalem is Jerusalem, for example.
Okay.
Ecclesia, and it actually is church. Iglesia, Iglesia, whatever, something like that.
Enrique Iglesias.
Yeah, but yeah, that guy, but it helps you sometimes when you look at the original language to kind of understand where a word comes from or something like that. So certain things we read a word and we think it means one thing in context when actually it means something different, and that leads to a lot of misinterpretation of Bible verses and people grabbing on to single words when we're using a translation from a word in an old language to a word in like English. And keep in mind that we're doing what's the best translation we can make on that word. Because there might be some words that we don't really have an equivalent for today. Like back then, that word maybe carried clear connotation to the reader, where today we don't really have a great way of describing the same sentiment. So I try to, when I'm writing my stuff and when I'm researching my stuff, I think I said it in the last episode that when I write these papers, it's because I'm researching it myself and I want to learn as much about it as possible. And forgive me for my latest couple of papers that have gotten way longer, but we went down some rabbit holes that were really, really, really fascinating. I think one of my recent papers is on women in ministry, which is that's a tough topic. I think once I kind of got through it, it was a lot easier to wrap my mind around. And I actually came to a surprising conclusion. Let's go with that route. I would have come to a different conclusion before I worked on the paper, but I don't want to give it away. But the point is, you dive down a whole bunch of rabbit holes. And in my mind, I want to learn as much as I can, but I also don't want to misportray something to any readers. So I'm trying to give you as much information as I can while also trying to understand as much information as I can. Because I don't want to be the guy who takes these leaps to draw conclusions. So if I can't draw a real conclusion and I feel like I have to make a leap, call myself out on it and just say, I don't know. It's actually something from the very early church when the Catholics and the Greek Orthodox split. That's in another recent paper.
You're going down another rabbit hole. You got 25 minutes to tell me what
Let me just
dinosaurs.
Finish this thought, then I'll come back. Let me just finish this thought. I'll come back. But the Catholics and the Greek Orthodox Church, that split happened. I think it was Greek Orthodox, but whatever. That they split along the. This was in the paper on communion. What does communion actually mean? They split on the idea of is it the blood and body of Christ actually, the transubstantiation was that Christ was present. And they basically both believed the same thing, but the Catholics explained it through transubstantiation. That was their, the way in which it was accomplished, that bread and wine actually became actual body and blood, where the Greek Orthodox Church just called it a mystery. So effectively said, I don't know. We think it's real. God does
Right.
things that we don't understand, so it's just a mystery. And why that's important to say, bringing us back to Noah's Ark and this stuff, is some things are going to be mysteries, and we have to be okay with it. Where you need to
Just
look
like the
for
stars.
huh?
Just like
Would you
the
say,
light
Megan?
from
I'm
the
sorry.
stars. Just
Yep.
like the light
Yep.
from the stars.
Yep. 100%. Yeah. I mean, and I would just beware of any information you're reading that tries to draw conclusions or tries to create their own narrative, and pass it off as truth rather than just a possibility around something that we just don't have all the information, and that's okay. God's ways are above our ways, and all we can do is chase the carrot and hope we learn as much as we can down along the
Right.
way. Okay, so let's see. We were talking about the when things were created. We almost got to the animals being created. Give me 1 second. We're almost to your
You
dinosaurs.
did. You did talk about the animals being created.
Well,
You
we
got
haven't
that
got to the
far.
day yet. We haven't gotten to the day yet of the animals. Okay, so here we are. All right. So we have the sea creatures. Oh, I guess we started the animals. You're right. You're right.
Mhm.
So we got the sea creatures and the birds. So on day 5, we have the animals of the sea and we have the birds. Day 6, we have livestock. So creatures that move along the ground and wild animals, beasts of the earth is what it was
Okay,
referenced.
so technically dinosaurs.
So presumably this would have included dinosaurs. I believe that dinosaurs are created beings by God. I know, I read all sorts of sci-fi books. You have aliens seeding planets and stuff like that. It's plausible. I can't sit here and tell you that's not plausible. I like in the movie Contact, the dad said, is there other life out there? And he said, well, if there's not, it would be an awful big waste of space. So
I
I
agree.
personally believe God is very creative and potentially created other things. I don't know. All
I
we
think
have
it's
is the
kind of
Bible. We know
naive.
about us.
I think it's kind of naive to think that we are the only living beings in the entire infinite universe.
Well, but is naive the right word? I mean,
Maybe
it's
not, but I feel like the universe is so infinite that
mhm.
for us to be the only living beings is kind of
Yeah, I'm
not
with you.
possible.
It feels unlikely because I mean the other side of it would be that because we had all these variables. So when we talk about in my paper on evolution, and I won't go down the rabbit hole, but when we talk about it, one of the pushes back is that there are so many variables that are just perfectly tuned in this world that it frankly can't be not created. is the punchline. Well, so one possibility is with God being so much greater than us and knowing everything, and his mysteries are, his ways are above our ways. Is it possible that he had to make this, as you would say, I think you use this word, ginormous? That's your word, right?
Yeah, that's my word.
Yeah. So is it possible that he created this ginormous universe, and it was required to just get that perfect balance? Sure. It's possible. God's ways are above our ways. I can't sit here and explain that to you. But if you're asking me if a gun was to my head and I have to decide that is the universe so big because it was to get the dials in just the right place, or is there other stuff out there that God also created? I would guess, I would believe the second is the latter is true. I can't tell you anything about it because we're only given stuff about us, our
Right.
relationship with God. Um, doesn't dissuade from something else, but I don't know. I'm fascinated. I love those books. I love movies about aliens and stuff too. Independence Day is one of my favorite movies, and Ender's Game is one of my favorite book series. Um,
Okay.
yeah. So in any case, we have our on day 6, we have our land animals, including the beasts of the earth, and we have mankind. So God creates in his own image, um, uh, male and female, across day 6. Um, we got into the whole male and female thing I get into in my Women in Ministry. It was pretty fascinating as well when you're kind of talking about what woman was created for. It's just interesting. I won't go down the rabbit hole right now, but it is a fascinating thing. But in any case, so we have dinosaurs potentially being created right before Adam. I think that's the order of operation here. So we got all these animals, presumably already mature, full grown, walking around, whatever, starting to reproduce, just like we talked about the plants. And presumably there's dinosaurs, right? And then he creates mankind and he tells Adam, you get to name all these things. Then he created woman. He said, you get to name this too. So Adam named Eve. All right. So all these things were there before the flood. Now, during that period of time, so shortly after all this naming and stuff, Eve
Quite the
was
homework.
deceived. What's this?
That's quite the homework, having to name all the animals.
That's true. You hope that God just created the base kinds, like we talked about before.
Right. Otherwise, Adam would have needed a very high vocabulary for pterodactyl.
Well, also plus what that is actually true. That has to be. I'm sure that we don't have a lot of the original names because we have so many things, and we're going to be talking about fossils here. But we've named a lot of those things ourselves later in that thing. So I would guess that we don't have some of the original names that Adam picked. And it's also fascinating to think, what language did Adam speak?
Right.
I'm going to add that to my list. I don't even know if there's answers to that one, but it is an interesting question. What?
Giving you a lot of homework today too.
Adam speak. Okay. So, effectively, so based on this, we would say humans and dinosaurs walked the earth at the same time based on the creation story. All right. So whether this happened over millions of years, billions of years, whatever, or this happened over 7 physical days, day 6, God created the beasts of the earth and people and man. And so we walked alongside the dinosaurs, according to the creation story. Now, what happened? Eve was deceived by the snake, which was Lucifer. My latest paper is on Luciferianism. Can I pronounce it? Luciferianism. And it's up. And I actually did research on that based on a conversation I'm having with someone, and I wanted to make sure that I understood the background of it. But these are people who celebrate, they don't worship Lucifer necessarily, but they celebrate that he was rebellious against God. They kind of like these are people, it's not even so much a religion, but these are people that they root for the rebel, something like that.
Got it.
Paper's kind of interesting. All right. So what happens? Eve, deceived, convinces Adam to eat of the fruit. So now they've sinned. We have original sin in the world. In most of my papers, I refer to sin as entropy. Science has already shown us that in a closed system, the system tends to decay on its own. This is called entropy. And so we have this new, let's call it disease, that's entered the system, sin, and that sin starts eating away at all living things. So this was what occurred between the creation and the flood, all this stuff happening. So presumably dinosaurs started spreading. There was good dinosaurs and bad dinosaurs, whatever. A bunch of them died in the flood would be the narrative here. So that then gets us into, so at the very least they lived together during a period of time. And knowing man, especially in a fallen world, we like to hunt things. So I have to assume that there was a period of time when we were running around killing a bunch of stuff. Did you have a question? I thought you started saying something.
You said presumably a bunch of dinosaurs died in the flood. Wouldn't it have been all of the dinosaurs, or are there dinosaurs on the ark?
There are dinosaurs on the ark, in my opinion. And the reason for that, let me find in my because after the flood, we have a couple of places in the Bible that refer to dinosaurs. And this is kind of an interesting thing. So if we just kind of bypass it really quick, there was a lot of bad things on Earth, a lot of evil things, including possibly some of the things from like our monster myths. You know, we already know there were giants. In the Bible, it says there were giants and men of renown. We had Nephilim, which were the offspring of fallen angels and humans. I mean, this gets into crazy stuff that existed before the flood. And this is in the Bible. I mean, the Bible talks about crazy junk that happened back then. So God wiped out all that and just had us restart.
So
Now,
Bigfoot could have been a thing prior to the flood.
potentially. I mean, who knows? Bigfoot could still be a thing today. We don't know.
That's true.
Maybe he's good at hiding. I mean, my wife and
He's
I
really
have a
good at
fish in our big fish tank that we haven't seen in a really long time, but they're known to hide anyways. Yes, we have another big fish in there that probably ate him, but we wouldn't be completely shocked if all of a sudden he just shows up one day fully grown. You know, could just happen. But
Right.
so in the book of Job, there's something called a behemoth. Now, the idea would be, well, let's finish this and we'll go back to it. That I think it's baby dinosaurs that were likely on the ark, because you know you're not going to fit some of the big dudes up there. So in Job, this is Job 40. There is something called the behemoth. So God describes a massive land animal to Job that to demonstrate his power. So the description of this land animal, you tell me what this sounds like. It eats grass like an ox, the strength in his loins and power in the muscles of his belly. He moves his tail like a cedar tree. Bones are like beams of bronze, ribs like bars of iron. Let's see. Is there anything else I say about him?
Isn't it supposed to
No.
be like a mammoth?
Well, you tell me. It says his tail was like a cedar tree. Do elephants have tails? Elephants kind of being of the same type as mammoths. Do they have tails that look like cedars, or they have that little kind of curly or you know, it's not a overly impressive tail on
No.
a elephant or a mammoth. A cedar tree is a big thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you think about something that has a tail, he moves his tail like a cedar. In my mind, I think of that as like a tree attached to the back of a giant animal. And
But
the
in my
tree is
mind, the tree, if you think about it, a trunk, it's not flexible really. So I'm picturing cedar branches, which would then, in the sense, be more like an elephant or a mammoth waving.
tell me about that.
Well, are
Because when
you
I hear
talking about
cedar,
the
I think the entire
branches?
tree.
Are you talking about okay, I guess then the branches are like the bushy part of the tail? Is that what you're
Well,
thinking?
maybe. You know, just the verse says he moves his tail like a cedar. So it's not really getting into the details of exactly what it you know, the exact look of it. It's really talking about the movement of it. So if I imagine attaching a cedar tree to the back of an animal, a large animal, and him swinging that back and forth, I'm thinking about things like, you know, Stegosaurus, you know, these big sauropods that we see that eat the
Right.
trees and stuff. You know, those things had these huge, you know, if you watch the Jurassic Park movie, the first animal they saw when they got to the island, you know, was that giant dinosaur. I'm thinking something
Mhm.
like that had this humongous tree that looked like a, you know, a humongous tail that looked like a tree trunk. And when you swing it, that's not a little curly Q tail or anything. To me, that's what it
Well,
sounds like.
I mean, even if you put well, I guess when you put the animal into perspective of how big the animal is, the cedar tree, I mean, even I I don't know, I feel like a giant animal, a cedar tree could still look small.
Well, I mean, it's possible. I mean, we don't know any of this for sure. So, I mean, when I read this verse, when it says he moves his tail like a cedar, my imagination imagines a full grown tree, a cedar tree. It doesn't say it's a small tree or a whatever. I mean, it specifically says cedar. If I think about a tail moving like that, I'm thinking about, something that is, swings this large thing. It sounds like you thought maybe it was kind of the branches, like a kind of like a bushy tail. Is that what you're thinking?
Almost the way it sways
Okay.
instead of just like a long stick going back and forth, how it sways
That's
was how
possible.
I was
Yeah. So
thinking
I
it,
mean,
because the
what so
trunk of the tail isn't gonna move at all. I mean, it's gonna be very like your stegosaurus, it's gonna be very straight moving,
well,
whereas the
right. Yeah,
branches
and
are
yeah,
more
so
fluid.
but it's still large. I mean,
Right.
because if you had this really short tail and when you moved it, it just stayed straight, kind of like when a dog wags its tail.
Yeah.
um when it's all excited, kind of like that. I don't think of that as like a cedar. When I think of cedar, I think big.
Yes.
Especially in the context of the rest of this. The rest of it says, first of all, it eats grass like an ox, so this is an herbivore, and the big sauropods ate from the trees, so these were not meat eaters. um, the strength in his loins and power in the muscles of his belly. So it talked about, if I kind of imagine what a giant dinosaur would look like, he would just look so impossibly powerful at that size that seems like a reasonable enough description. Then he says he moves his tail like a cedar. Then he says his bones are like beams of bronze. I don't know what that necessarily means, but beams sounds like strong to
Mhm.
me. Um, Same thing. Ribs like bars of iron also sounds strong to me. So in any case, this is at least plausibly talking about a dinosaur. Um, so this is something that existed after the flood. So this is in Job. So um, now one thing I was looking into that's kind of interesting is well, why aren't dinosaurs seemingly around today? Well, things can go extinct. We've seen people, human beings hunt things to extinction. So we still have sin in the world. So just because something came over in the ark doesn't mean it's meant to exist forever. We have plenty of other animals that are also have gone extinct. So I don't really see that as being a problem, but it does seem like God saved the dinosaurs. Would be my take on it, given that we seemingly see something that might be a dinosaur in Job. Similarly, in later on in Job, we have Leviathan. So Leviathan was supposed to be this thing in the water. So can you pull in Leviathan with a fish hook? Now, this was a question asked to Job. So presumably Job knew about Leviathan. This wasn't a surprise. Um, who can open the doors of his face? So his teeth are terrible all around. Um, his rows of scales are his pride, shut up tightly as with a seal. Out of his mouth go burning lights, sparks of fire shoot out, implies some form of bioluminescence or chemical defense mechanism. So, I don't know, stuff came out of his mouth, maybe? He makes the deep boil like a pot. I imagine that's maybe from movement or something. But in any case, he seems to be talking about something monstrous here. In my imagination, I'm kind of thinking about that giant thing that was in one of the other Jurassic Park movies that ate the T-Rex off the shore. I think
Oh,
T-Rex
yep.
went into the water and some giant thing ate him.
Yep.
So I guess I look at this as being at least plausibly a dinosaur. Then you have, once you get outside of the Bible, we have, well, actually, still inside the Bible, in the Old Testament, the Hebrew word tannin, Tannin, appears roughly 28 times, and this word means dragon. So if you're
No.
someone from post flood times and you see a crazy giant lizard. Remember, dinosaurs are a word we came up with in like the 1800s. So they're not
Okay.
talking about dinosaurs back then. But the fact that this guy's talking that a dragon is talked about 28 times is pretty interesting um to me. So,
Well, the
seemingly
Leviathan actually kind of sounded very or dragon-like when you're talking about fire breathing and
yeah,
such.
right. Yeah, so at the very least it seems very, interesting to me, and it seems like at least plausibly um these things existed, and there's things outside the Bible that reference the stories about dragons and slaying them, heroes who slay dragons and that kind of stuff. Now maybe they're just stories, who knows, maybe they're based on some truth, who knows, but it's at least plausible that dinosaurs were still around until, again, human beings probably hunted them to extinction because that's what we do.
Right,
um
right.
yeah. So, what I find very interesting that kind of supports the flood narrative, um, and I want to look into some asteroid stuff too, but, we tend to believe that the extinction point of the dinosaurs was this giant asteroid that hit the right off of coast of like Mexico. Um, Chicxulub is the and I think that was the name of the plateau or something where it actually hit. So it's believed that that is how the dinosaurs went extinct. Now, when you because they find this layer, so when the archaeologists are looking at stuff, they find this layer of Earth that they called the KPG boundary. This is an iridium timestamp. So this is a rare metal that is very rare on Earth, but it's fairly common in asteroids. So this leads us to believe that, hey, this major asteroid hit the Earth. It made this giant boom. A bunch of dust went up into the sky and laid down this boundary across the entire Earth. Certainly possible. That sounds like a fairly reasonable thing. I've seen all the asteroid movies too. That sounds like it could happen, right? We have Jupiter in our solar system that hopefully pulls some of those in. That kind of seems to me to be like God's vacuum cleaner. He threw this giant planet out there to gravitationally pull stuff in, but presumably an asteroid can hit us. We have little meteorites and stuff that hit us all the time. But an alternative explanation for that is when you look at the flood narrative, it's easy for us, like from a children's book, to think the flood was like, oh, it just rained for a while, and that these rainstorms were just intense, and it covered the entire planet. And we have found layers that we believe would be from the flood across like 5 continents. It's fascinating the amount of evidence we have for the flood. But it wasn't just from rain. You wouldn't have been out if you were on the ark. You wouldn't have been in this nice boat trip. You would have been in like this massive cataclysm. You would have had, water dumping from the skies, not just rain, but like from the firmament, dumping from the skies. You would have had all the water stored inside the earth exploding out of the ground, releasing perhaps rare metals from the ground. And the inside the earth, this metal does exist. Plausible that since Noah's flood is described as something very violent and definitely mentions things exploding from inside the earth, that could be the rationale that we have this layer. But what I find more interesting about Noah's flood, and I know we're getting short on time, but what I find more interesting about Noah's flood is if you imagine having a zillion dinosaurs all over Earth, and all of a sudden you have this major flood that happens very quickly, which is how Noah's Ark sounds. It's not like this just poof, this is not like this just happened over a long period of time. It did last a long period of time, but to make sure, I guess everything was drowned. But you know, you had flooding waters that were lifting the ark up, I presume, very quickly. So you have all these dinosaurs that are getting washed away. So they're all, inside the ocean being, thrown about and stuff. So presumably they drowned and all settled in one big pile. And then we're still covered by additional silt and stuff like that. To kind of, so we would have found then piles of dinosaurs that were fossilized. That's what that would explain. Because the only way
Okay.
fossils can be created is if an animal dies and is quickly covered up and kind of airtight and that kind of stuff. Otherwise, you don't have the environment needed to find fossils. And we have found like live tissue in some of these fossils that didn't decay away, that would have decayed if they hadn't been protected. We also see layers of rock, especially at the Grand Canyon, where you have these rock layers, and when you look at the Grand Canyon, it looks like these things were laid down in layers. It has a color, a visible gradient of color when you look at the side of the walls in the Grand Canyon. Well, if you look at an individual layer, it makes like 90-degree turns and stuff. Like this was a whole bunch of material that was laid down all at one time, because there's usually going to be things that wash away and stuff like that. So if these layers were laid down over hundreds of thousands or millions of years, they wouldn't be as even as they are. So the flood advocates would say that, hey, the whole world was basically in a blender, and these layers were laid down as the flood started subsiding. And that's why they're laid down in even layers. That's why they're across most of the earth. And that's why we have layers that contained certain materials, something like that. So
Okay.
I feel like it is a plausible explanation to something that, given the fact that there's flood stories all over the world, and we can date back some historical stuff to the tribes of Noah, the different people of Noah. We can see where they traveled to and stuff. I personally believe in a young earth and the flood story. I think that those are the ones that hold the most water, although young earth versus old earth doesn't matter. All right, how am I doing on time? Did I go over too much?
Not too much, just a little.
So what do you think about all that? Did I answer any of your questions about dinosaurs, or at least give you a plausibility of how they could have
You actually
worked?
answered my question completely. And that's a question that I've had pretty much my whole life.
Okay, so did I answer it in a good way or a bad way?
No, in a good
Are
way.
you more of a skeptic or less of a skeptic?
I'm less of a skeptic. Now it totally kind of puts more of a timeline in perspective. I mean, even just going through the creation, I guess I never realized, or I guess not realized, but put dinosaurs in that animal category. Because, I mean, obviously, dinosaurs are their own big thing in today's world. So,
Yeah. I like Jurassic Park too. So, if
me
we
too.
found some living ones, I'd be cool with that.
Well,
So
and essentially, we don't know what's at the bottom of the ocean. We can't
we
get that
don't.
far. So there's probably dinosaurs down there and you just
Could
don't
be.
know it.
One of my favorite books that's now become a movie is the book Meg. I think I mentioned it last week, didn't I?
Yep. Megalodon.
Yeah, that gives a narrative of how that's still alive from the dinosaur age, but it somehow got to the surface and now it's eating whales and stuff. Hey, that stuff's
And,
cool.
and a little chihuahua, isn't it? Or a little dog.
No,
in
it's
that movie.
possible. Well, in the movie, they always do that. Did it actually eat the dog?
No, I think the dog is like the only thing that survived
Yeah,
and
because
then
that's
showed back
usually
up in the second one.
they do it for comic relief. They have the little tiny dog with the bow swimming in the water with the megalodon, and that's the only
Yep.
thing that survived.
Yep.
Okay. Well, so have we is that a wrap? Do we
I
have we
think
run
that's
out
a
of time?
wrap. We have run out
Okay,
of
well,
time.
all right. Well, I will have to come up with our next exciting topic for next week and see if I can keep moving our skeptic Megan down the line.
Keep me on my toes.
That's right.
Awesome.
All
Well,
right.
thank
Well,
you guys for watching. Everybody hit that like and subscribe.
all right. Have a good one.
We're out.
Thanks for watching. Hit that like and subscribe and tune in to next week's podcast.